Welcome to your first set of notes, students. Generally speaking, you want to look at your notes as a replacement for your textbook. Since there is no textbook for the course, uh, you're going to want to go back over these notes time and time again when you have assignments that follow after them. You're going to want to go back to these notes as you're reviewing for your tests. And what you'll find in these notes is after we get through a series of slides, there usually will be a follow-up multiple choice question kind of helping you recap some of the previously covered material. Those questions tend to be either included in quizzes or the exams at the end of each unit. So that in mind, let's go ahead and get into some slides. Today's topic, we're looking at an introduction to the human geography, just the concept of the course itself, as well as talking about maps, and we'll also get into talking about places and regions. This is one of our longer set of notes, but it covers everything that we're going to do in Unit 1, so we just get it all done in one shot. As we go through these slides, I'm going to try to point out just the key thing to know. I'm not going to read them to you. I figure you can do that. So if you look at this first slide, really the key is to differentiate between what is human geography and physical geography. Now, human geography is highlighted there, and you can see that has to do with human activities. So we're going to examine what are the things that humans do to the Earth itself, whereas last year, if you took physical geography, you were looking at what's already located on the Earth. One of the main tools that we use in geography is maps, and so the next series of slides are going to cover the maps that you see listed on this slide below. First type is a reference map. A reference map simply is going to help you figure out how to get from point A to point B. Now, this map isn't the clearest, but I think it's clear enough that you can see you're looking at the United States and it's a road map. So if you had a clearer version of this, you could locate yourself in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and figure out what roads you need to take to get to Kansas City. So that's a reference map. Choropleth map is a type of map that tells you a story using a color scheme. Now, one of your assignments later on is going to be create your own choropleth map, given some data that we'll pass along to you. If you look at this one, you can see it's turkey production by state. The states that are the darkest colors are those that produce the greatest amount of turkeys per year. Zero in on Minnesota, you can see that Minnesota is one of the leading turkey producers in the country. You may have known that, you may not have known that. Something else that's worth noting on this map before we carry on is look at the year. Even though I know it's 2020 now, this map came from 2007. If you looked at a map of 2020, you'd still find Minnesota being one of the leading producers of turkeys in the U.S. Next type of map is a dot map, and so the difference here is that this dot map is showing production of a product. In this case, it's milk cows. But rather than just by state, it's getting a little more specific and can pinpoint where in each state the milk cows can be found. So you look at some of the major milk or dairy producing states. California appears to be probably the leading producing state in terms of quantity. Wisconsin also right there in terms of the amount of state that's dedicated to dairying. But you'll also find that dairying is done all around the United States, primarily because milk is a product that spoils, so you can't have just one place producing it, like say California, and have to ship the milk all the way across the country to New York or Maine and expect it to still stay good. Next type of map is a symbol map, and so the story that this one is telling us is the amount of colleges and universities in the United States that offer courses in map making or cartography. So the symbols on this map are circles. They tell us two things. The first is the size of the circle. It tells us the number of courses in cartography that are offered in the university systems within each state. And then next is the relative importance, and that's based on the shade of the circle, and that relevance or the importance of it has to do with the amount of degrees that are offered in cartography. So the states where they have a high amount of importance, those are going to be colleges or institutions that probably have more geography-based courses or courses that require map making. Next type of map is one where we can distort the landform. So it's a map of the world that you're looking at here. It looks a little different than what you are used to seeing in this because instead of taking the land and taking the shape of the country, we are looking at their population. So the shapes of the countries have been distorted to the size of their population. So China and India are the largest two countries in the world, and what other countries you normally might expect to see on the map, Canada in particular, much smaller than what you'd expect it to be. Same with Russia. Topographical maps. These are going to show changes in elevation. So it gives you a good idea of the contours of the Earth. These types of maps are pretty useful if you're going to be hiking, so you kind of have an idea if you're going to be going up or down a lot of hills, or certainly if you're flying an airplane, you have an idea of where the hills are or where towers are, and you definitely don't want to run into any of those. So here's our first question, recapping the different types of maps and looking at human geography versus physical geography. The question is, which of the following topics would not be an element of human geography? So take a moment. How would you answer that? Which one of those four options is not something that is created by humans? And so hopefully you'd guess that climate. Now, yes, humans can alter the climate a little bit, but climate exists whether humans are or are not there. So therefore, that's part of physical geography. But religion, cities, language, all human geography, topics that you will be covering in the course, either this trimester or the next time you have human geography, Geography B. Question number 2, after we went over those maps, what type of map are you looking at there? Hopefully you guessed topographic because you're looking at the contours of the Earth, and D is the correct answer for that one. Now, if you look at the basics of maps, it's basically used for two things. You can use a map either as a reference tool, trying to figure out how to get from place to place, or you can use it as a communication tool, a way to tell a story and give people information. We already looked at some different examples before in the previous styles of map. So here you can see a reference map being used as a reference tool. You've got the western Twin Cities here, and say you're at Ridgedale Shopping Center, which is on Interstate 394, Highway 12. It's just to the right of the center of the middle of the image, and say you wanted to get up to Plymouth Creek Park and you weren't sure how to do it and you didn't have your phone, but you had this map. You look and see that, okay, I'd take 394 west and then I'd get on to 494, go north on that, and then I'm going to need to exit on either 55 or 9. And looks like I'm going to need to take a back road, but Plymouth Creek is right up there, and Plymouth Creek's right up towards the top of that map. And you're using it as a reference tool. As a communication tool, that's again telling a story. So we don't need to know how to get from place to place using this map, but rather if we wanted to see what's the breakdown of different types of students that make up each school district in the metro area, that's what this map is going to show. The circles, first of all, show the size of the school district. So the largest circles have the greatest amount of students. And then within those circles, it breaks down the race or the ethnicity of the student. And of course, a little bit older map, so we would be looking back historically here 20 years ago, what was the racial and ethnic distribution. Today, it would very much look different. The circles would be different in size, and certainly the colors of the pie would change as well. Okay, question number 3 for you. What is the purpose of this map below? You're looking at a global traffic map, so you're probably looking at airline patterns. Not really telling you how to get from A to B, so hopefully you decided it was a communications tool, because that's what it's doing. It's communicating the global traffic patterns from last decade. Now, another term you need to be familiar with is the scale of a map. When we look at large scale maps, we're talking about lots and lots of detail. So think of it as a blown up image of what's on the Earth's surface. So it's not going to cover a large area. It's going to cover a smaller area, but it's going to show you more things on it. A small scale map is going to encompass more area, but it's not going to give you the detail. Now, scales can be expressed in 3 different ways. You can see that on the slide in front of you. It could be a ratio, or it could be written down as like a certain distance on the map is the equivalent of a different distance in real life, or it could just be a graphic scale. So to give you a better idea of going from small scale to large scale, the first map up top there is looking at the United States, and you can see Atlanta is listed. And if we wanted to get larger scale, we could look at a map of the southeastern United States. Now, Atlanta is a little more easy to pick out. You can see that clearly it's in Georgia. You can even zoom in on Georgia, and now Atlanta appears even larger. And then when you zoom in on Atlanta at the bottom there, at the largest scale, now you can see not only Atlanta, but you can see the surrounding communities. You can see the interstate system that is built to get around the metropolitan area of Atlanta. So if we asked you, look at these two maps from Google, which one is the larger scale? Which one is showing greater detail? Right? One is looking at Minnesota and western Wisconsin, a little bit of the Dakotas and Canada. The other is zeroed in on Park High School, and it's an old picture of Park High School, by the way. As you can see, the stadium doesn't have turf on it, and we've had turf at Park High School for 14 years. But map A has the larger scale because it has more detail. Now, when we talk about maps, we also look at projection, and when we are trying to take the Earth, which is, of course, on a sphere, and we're trying to depict it on a flat surface like a paper or even a screen, flat screen for that matter, we have to distort the image. The only true accurate model of the Earth is a globe. And when we distort the image and we flatten out what's on a globe and try to put it on paper or put it on a screen, we have to use some different projection types, and those are listed, and I'm not going to ask you to know the different types of projection. We're just going to show you what they are, the cylindrical or the conical or the planar. And in any way we try to project that spherical image on a flat surface, we're going to have to stretch out the way that the land looks in some way, shape, or form. So that's what we're saying by distortion and projection. Different ways that we've tried as geographers and cartographers to give an accurate image or view of the Earth without distorting it too much. You can see there's the Mercator projection, there's the Goods Homolosine equal area projection, the sinusoidal equal area projection. What you want to see is you want to see that, say, a continent like Africa appears to be about the same size as Asia because they're very close in size. The Mercator projection does not do that. In some maps that I've seen, I used to have one in my old classroom at a different school I taught in. It was so stretched out that Greenland looked like it was larger than Africa. And we know, of course, that's not the case. Question number 5. Globes are the most accurate form of representing the Earth's surface because they are not distorted. Is that a true or a false statement? Sometimes the trick is you guys would see a word like most accurate and you think instantly, well, nothing can be the most of anything, so it's false. But in this case, that is not a false statement. That is a true statement. Globes are the most accurate form because they are spherical. When we look at map making and some of the tools that geographers use today, 3 main things we're going to look at here: GPS, remote sensing, and geographic information systems, also known as GIS. The GPS, you've probably heard of that. You have it in your cars. It is based upon information from 24 military satellites. It helps pinpoint where we are on the Earth. Remote sensing is the type of mapping that takes place from taking pictures from space. It could be from airplanes. So think of like Google Earth, Google Images. Those are some remote sensing examples. Just the Google Maps, I should say. Google Earth is actually more of a GIS where we're mashing up maps and we're layering it with information. So if you think of Google Earth, then you can put stores over the top of what's on the surface. You could put, I think people put images on there. If they've taken pictures at those locations, you can click on locations and actually see what it looks like, sometimes 360 degrees. And so that's what GIS is. It's kind of a fun image where you've layered on Abbey Road, you've taken the Beatles and put them on top of what actually Abbey Road looks like today. GPS, again, just an overview here of how that system of satellites work. It's that military system that gives you that pinpointed location on the surface of the Earth. Remote sensing, again, just taking it from the air, could be as far away as outer space, could be as close as airplanes or drones. And then GIS, you're using the images that you have and information that you have and compiling layers upon layers to be able to create a composite map with all sorts of information on it. That's geographic information systems. So a computer system that stores, organizes, retrieves, analyzes, and displays this geographic data. Well, we didn't even talk about aerial telemetry, so you can eliminate that option right away. Usually students are torn between GPS and GIS on this one, but just remember it's a computer system, so the geographic information system is what we're looking for on that one, or GIS. Okay, I'm kind of bouncing away from maps now into some other topics, and we'll be random here for the next 10 minutes or so. Looking at place is a way to describe where you are on the map. And so 4 ways that we're going to be looking at how you can do that. You can use the name of a place, you can use its site, you can use its situation or its mathematical location. So let's start with names of places. So one way to describe where you're at is using what we call a toponym, which just simply is the name of a place, the fancy word for what the place is called. So sometimes the places are named after people, or it could be have some religious connection, could be a historical event that occurred there, it could be something about the physical features or resources. So think of Apple Valley, probably named after a physical feature, right? Or Golden Valley, perhaps that has to do with a resource. You can find that names often will change. For example, if you have been up to Forest Lake, you'll find that there's a little racetrack before you get to Forest Lake called Running Aces. Now that's in a town called Columbus, and Columbus wasn't there 15 years ago. It was a small unincorporated city. They incorporated and now they have established themselves as a city. And if you drive up there, you'll find a bridge going over the interstate. It even says Columbus on it to let you know that you're there. So what is the term that's used to describe the name given to a place? It was the first bullet point in the previous slide. We're looking at a toponym, D. Next concept is site. When we're talking about where we are, just looking at what does it describe the place through its look, its smell, its feel. Sometimes we can use site to also explain why we chose it to develop a city there, because maybe there's an economic advantage to doing so, or maybe it provides some natural defense, or it has some resources. So for example, Manhattan was chosen one because it was a good defense site for New York City. It's at the convergence of the East River and the Hudson River, and you can even see that the humans have built up Manhattan since the 1650s going into the 1990s. Situation, when we look at that, we're talking about what is a place situated by, so what is it next to or what's it nearby. So this map's showing the University of Minnesota, the East Bank. The mall area is a pretty common reference point when you go there for freshman orientation. You might have a science class, for example, in Smith Hall, and you don't know where that is, but you ask and someone says, yeah, if you just go to the mall area, and it's on the left-hand side as you're walking towards Northrop. Well, that's using situation to explain where you are. It'd be just like saying, well, I don't know how to get to Bella Pizza in Cottage Grove, but someone might say, well, if you go to Dairy Queen and then you take the right turn right before Dairy Queen and go down into that little strip mall, there's Bella Pizza there. That's using situation. Question number 8, which of the following describes a place by using situation? Take a look. Which one is using an example of something nearby to describe it? You're looking at A. It's next to a major trade center. When we look at maps also, we can use mathematical location. You've seen these grid patterns on globes and maps that you've looked at before. The lines that run from the North Pole to the South Pole, those are called meridians. The lines that run from east to west, from the equator all the way up to the North Pole, and from the equator down to the South Pole, those are called parallels. So 0 degrees, the 0 degree parallel, that is known as the equator. 0 degrees, the meridian that's 0 degrees is known as the prime meridian, which means it's the main meridian. It runs through Greenwich. You can see it's located on the right-hand side of the globe there. We'll come back to that. 0 degrees latitude is called which one? So that is the equator. And 0 degrees longitude, that is the prime meridian. Looking at time zones, well, there's 24 time zones in the world. The reason that we created those time zones was that it helped railroad schedules be kept straight. So it was in the late 1800s that was done. So the prime meridian then is marking the beginning of the time zones, and then the international date line is the end of the time zones. So you can operate east 180 degrees from the prime meridian, or you can go west 180 degrees from the prime meridian. The United States has 6 time zones, 4 on the continental United States, and then Alaska and Hawaii each have their own time zone. So if you look at this map here, you can see just to the right of the middle is Greenwich Meridian. So that's, the 0 hour. And if we wanted to know, well, what time is it in Minneapolis when it's midnight in Greenwich, or you could say London, because London's in the same time zone. You can see Minnesota, if you know where it is on the US map there, it's a 6 hour difference, from London. So if it's midnight there, then it's going to be 6 hours earlier in the day. It's 6 p.m. in Minneapolis, St. Paul. For those of you that are soccer fans, if you wonder why are we always watching soccer games at like 6:30 in the morning on a Saturday, well, that's because it's already afternoon in England when they're playing. Question number 10. If it's 3 o'clock in Minneapolis, if you go back to the previous slide, what time is it in Boston? Well, Minneapolis is in the -6 time zone, and Boston's in -5, so it's an hour later in the day in Boston. So if it's 3 in Minneapolis, it must be 4 in Boston in the East Coast. Next, we're going to take a look at 3 different types of regions: formal regions, functional regions, and vernacular regions. This is another concept that we like to use to help describe where we are, where we're from. A formal region is very easy to understand. It's got clear boundaries, and so you know when you're in a formal region and when you've entered into a different formal region, because they can be measured on a map. So a state is a good example of a formal region. You know when you're in Minnesota versus when you're in Wisconsin, because there are borders drawn up. You know when you're in Cottage Grove versus when you're in Woodbury, because there are signs that tell you, and you know there are, again, clear boundaries. So that's a formal region. Functional regions are ones that are organized around a center point, which we call a node. And as you get further away from that center point, your region gets weaker, something called distance decay. The map shows NFL teams and their fan bases. And so if you zoom in and you look at, you can pause this and zoom in, you can see the fan bases are highly concentrated around where the team plays, but the further you get away, the less fans you're going to find, or you're going to start running into other functional regions with other fan bases. Another example, or way of thinking of functional region, think of a radio tower. You're driving in your car and you get further and further away from that signal, it's going to get weaker and weaker, and eventually it's going to run out. So this map is showing Massachusetts and some various stations that are there, and basically their range or their functional region of that radio station. Malls, another example of a functional region. This is out in Nova Scotia, Canada. The Micmac Mall is a fairly popular shopping center, and so the highest number of people that shop at the Micmac Mall are closest to it in the red. The further you get away from Micmac Mall, the less people that are going to go there, because there, as you can see, there are other shopping centers in that area that people can go to and get similar, comparable, or even the same products that might be found at the Micmac Mall. So once you get really far away from it, you're finding people aren't going to go there, because maybe they have a Subway, but all these other shopping centers have Subways as well, and if they're a lot closer to your home, you're probably going to go to the one that's closest to home. Last type of region is a vernacular perceptual region, and this one, they're hard to define and there is no center point. So kind of like functional, they don't have that clear border like a formal one would, but here there's no center to it. So like when you asked, where are you from in the Twin Cities? Well, this map kind of shows, well, if we're going to say we're from Cottage Grove, we're in the southeast. But really, we're in the East Metro as well. Or we could be considered part of the South Metro. So it's not very clear when you're in one or the other, and then there's no capital or center to the Southeast Metro, the Northeast Metro, the Northwest Metro. It's not like Anoka is the center of Northwest Metro, even though looking at the way that this map tries to define it, it looks like it's in the center. That doesn't really exist. It's hard to define. Another example, and maybe easier to grasp, is what part of the country are you from? The United States. Well, in this part of Minnesota, we tend to think we're part of the Midwest. If you get up to Duluth or Hibbing or National Falls, they're going to say, well, we're from the North. And if you even get to north of Fargo, like up in the East Grand Forks or up there, they're going to consider themselves part of the Western United States. So really, depending on where you are, people have different perceptions of which region they live in. So the U.S. is which kind of region? Remember, clear borders. We know when we're in the United States versus when we're not. That makes it a formal region. Back to that notion of scale, a real quick comment on the scale of our Earth seems to be getting smaller and smaller through the process known as globalization. And what we've been seeing is our world keeps getting smaller, mainly because of technology and innovations in transportation. So we're much more mobile than we were centuries ago. And as a result, our economies of different countries are coming together, and we have companies or corporations that operate in many different countries, and maybe they produce some goods in one country, but sell them throughout the world. And what we find locally then is just more specialization. There's certain things that get made locally that you wouldn't have any need for somewhere else. So specialization still exists at the local level, but global economy is has become the dominant feature on our planet. And along with that, we find a convergence towards a monoculture or one culture. And we'll be taking a look at that actually as we start out Human Geography B, because culture is our first unit. But that's all part of the globalization piece. Question number 12. The economy of the United States is not affected by economies of other countries. Is that a true statement or a false statement? Well, I hope at this point you clearly realize that the U.S. relies on the economies of other countries just like they rely on the economy of the United States. So therefore, that is a false statement. Bouncing to a new topic, the idea of distribution. When we look at maps, maps can tell us where things are located. Maybe they're located more in one part of a country or an area than others. When we look at distribution, one concept that we need to be familiar with is the density, or the number of things in an area. And then when we examine the density, we can figure out if the concentration of something is clustered in one spot or if it's evenly distributed or dispersed throughout the area. And even beyond that, we can look at patterns that are created through the distribution. And we can decide maybe there's a standard or geometric pattern that we can figure out, or perhaps there is less of a pattern and it's just what we call organic. So when you take a look at a map of a country like Canada, we look at the density of its population, and looking at it overall, there's not a lot of color on it, which means it's not that densely populated a country. But when you want to look at the concentration and say, where is their population concentrated, it's pretty clear it's in the southern part of Canada. Well, because it's warmer down there. And there's more waterways for transportation and trade. And then is there a pattern? Well, not really. I mean, you can see there's a lot of people along the Great Lakes and along the St. Lawrence Seaway, but then there's also some in the middle in Winnipeg. And then when you get out west, there's Edmonton and Calgary. And those aren't really located along the waterways. So there's some organic pattern to that, not a geometric pattern. Another topic is that we'll be looking at is the spread. And we'll come back to diffusion again in Human Geography B. But when something is spread, we can trace where it starts from, or its hearth, as it's known, the point of origin, and how did it spread. Two basic types we want you to be familiar with. One is the idea of relocation, and that is where humans are physically taking the idea or concept from one place to another, like, for example, bringing their language, way of speaking, or bringing their religion, or some of their biology, their ethnicity with them. Other type of diffusion would be like a hierarchical diffusion coming from power or authority or fashion trends, and technology has really helped hierarchical diffusion become one of the most common types of diffusion, whereas a couple centuries ago, relocation was going to be more commonly found. When you look at relocation diffusion like religion, you can see there are some hearths or starting points for some of our major world religions. Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism, and then the arrows help you understand historically in which directions those religions spread from their origin point. Whereas you look at hierarchical diffusion, if you look at TVs from the 1950s through the early 2000s, some of the industrialized countries of the world were the ones that had the greatest amount of TVs, and then as other countries that started gaining some economic power and wealth, and the capacity to be able to afford and make TVs, more countries jumped on board with that. And then by 2005, you see a lot of countries of the world have people that have access to TVs as their main form of information communication. Last question here. Language and religion tend to be spread through which type of diffusion? Well, we didn't talk about expansion. We didn't talk about stimulus. So it's either going to be hierarchical or relocation. And, those two still have to be brought physically by a person. So we are looking at B. That is the end of the notes. I know these were really long. This is one of the longest sets we have to do. Now you can move on to looking at some of your first two assignments. So thanks for paying attention. And again, remember that these notes are basically your textbook. So you don't have to listen to me as you go back and look these over, but you're going to want to refer back to these notes as you continue to work your way through the course.